Okay. Well, we're in the section of the book of Exodus, which goes from chapter 2 through to the end of chapter 4, in which we see Moses being chosen as the one to deliver Israel from their oppression in Egypt. And last week we were in chapter 3, and we saw here how God was commissioning Moses for this task, for him to return to Egypt. If you remember, Moses had gone to Midian. He'd fled from Egypt after his murder of an Egyptian had been discovered. He'd fled to Midian and had been there for 40 years. And at the end of that 40 years, God appeared to Moses in the burning bush. Moses was attracted by the sight of this bush, which was on fire, but it wasn't being consumed. And then God spoke to Moses through the burning bush there, communicated with him, and commissioned him for this task of returning to Egypt to lead the people out. But Moses didn't really want to do the job, and so he began to make some excuses. And first of all, he asked, "Well, who am I that I should go? I'm nobody important. Why should I do the job?" And God assured him that he would be with Moses, that God's presence would be with him. And then Moses came up with a second excuse and said, "Well, if I go there and the people ask, well, what's the name of this God who has sent you? Then what am I to say? How am I to answer them?" And God revealed his name there and told him that I am who I am, and that his name was Yahweh, is how we think of the translation, translated as Lord. That this would be the name that Moses was to use. So the conversation between Moses and God continues then into chapter 4, and we'll have a look here to begin with in chapter 4, verses 1 to 9. We'll read this passage. This is a continuation, if you remember the scene in from chapter 3 of Moses being at the bush here, the burning bush, and God speaking to him. Then Moses answered, "Behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, 'The Lord did not appear to you.' The Lord said to him, 'What is that in your hand?' He said, 'A rod.' And he said, 'Cast it on the ground.' So he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses fled from it. But the Lord said to Moses, 'Put out your hand and take it by the tail.' So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Again the Lord said to him, "Put your hand into your bosom." And he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous, as white as snow. Then God said, "Put your hand back into your bosom." So he put his hand back into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. "If they will not believe you," God said, "or heed the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. If they will not believe even these two signs, or heed your voice, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it upon the dry ground. And the water which you shall take from the Nile will become blood upon the dry ground." So Moses comes up with another excuse here, and he expresses his fear that when he goes back to Egypt, that the people will not listen to him because they will not believe that the Lord has appeared to him in this revelation. Moses perhaps is thinking of the earlier rejection that he'd received by the people back in chapter 2 and verse 14, after he had killed that Egyptian and that it had been discovered, and he tried to settle a dispute between two of the Hebrews who were struggling together. And one of them answered Moses, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" So perhaps he's thinking of the way in which he'd been treated some 40 years previously, and maybe thinking, well, they're not going to listen to me this time either. But God answers this objection by showing that Moses will be given the power to perform signs or miracles, which will convince the people that the Lord has appeared to him. So God asks what it is that he's holding in his hand, and Moses answered, "A rod." And this would be his shepherd's rod. Remember, Moses is looking after the sheep of his father-in-law, so he has a rod or a staff, a shepherd's rod or staff. And in verse 20, it's called the rod of God. Psalm 23, which is, of course, the well-known psalm, begins, "The Lord is my shepherd." The psalmist speaks of, in verse 4 there, addressing God, "Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." So these were the tools or the instruments of a shepherd, a rod and a staff. A rod would normally be used for protection or defending the sheep, and a staff would be what he would use to assist in walking or for guiding the sheep. So this is what Moses has on him as a shepherd. So God tells Moses then to throw this staff onto the ground, and as he does so, it turns into a snake or a serpent. And Moses, surprised by what has happened, perhaps unexpectedly, runs away from it. He flees from it. God then tells Moses to take the serpent by the tail. That's not usually how you would get hold of a snake or a serpent. You'd usually grab it by the head, just behind the head. But God tells him to take it by the tail, and as he does so, it turns back into the rod again. And God explains that by this sign the people may believe that the Lord has appeared to you. So that's one sign that Moses would be able to use to convince the people that the Lord had indeed appeared to him. And then a second sign is given. Moses is told to put his hand into his bosom, put it in his cloak or clothing, and then when he withdraws his hand, it's leprous. It has this skin condition, skin disease on the hand. But when he puts his hand back inside his bosom, inside his cloak or garment, and then withdraws it again, the leprosy, the skin condition has gone, and his hand is restored to normal. So if the people will not believe or the first sign, turning the rod into the serpent, then perhaps they will believe the second sign of his hand becoming leprous and then being restored again. But if they still refuse to believe, God is going to provide a third sign. Moses will be able to take some water from the River Nile, pour it onto the dry ground, and it will become blood. And again, this is in order to convince the people. From the conclusion of the chapter in verses 29 to 31 of chapter 4, we see that these signs were effective with the people, and we'll get to that verse towards the end of the lesson there. But those signs that Moses was able to perform did convince the people that the Lord had appeared to Moses. So these signs were not magic tricks that were designed to attract a crowd of people, but they were given to enable Moses to show the identity of God, that he is the Lord, and he will do what he says. He will deliver them. Just as Jesus during his time was able to perform signs. John in his gospel refers to Jesus' miracles as signs because they point to his identity, and they given in order to convince people that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. So in the same way, Moses has this power to perform these signs so that people will be convinced that the Lord has spoken to him. So God is preparing Moses for what will soon happen when he returns to Egypt. We'll read on here in verses 10 to 17 then. But Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either heretofore or since thou hast spoken to thy servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue. Then the Lord said to him, Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him dumb or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. But he said, O my Lord, send, I pray, some other person. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, Is there not Aaron your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. And behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. And you shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. And I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and he will teach you what you shall do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be a mouth for you, and you shall be to him as God. And you shall take in your hand this rod with which you shall do the signs. So despite God's promise here, giving Moses this ability to perform these signs, Moses is still reluctant to go. And his excuse now is that he's not a good speaker. He's not an eloquent speaker. Oh, my Lord, he says, I am not eloquent, either heretofore or since thou hast spoken to thy servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue. The phrase slow of speech there is could literally be translated as heavy of mouth. So Moses felt that he did not have the necessary ability to speak for this task. And there's perhaps an implied criticism of God here, that when he says that I wasn't a good speaker before you spoke to me, and I'm not a good speaker now. So God, it's as if, well, he's blaming God for not providing him with that ability. There were others whose speaking ability was also called into question. Jeremiah used this as an excuse in Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 6 to 9. After God has appointed him to be a prophet in verse 5 there, then Jeremiah says, Ah, Lord God, behold, I do not know how to speak, for I am only a youth. So Jeremiah is using the same excuse as Moses did, only he said, well, I'm only a youth, I don't know how to speak. But the Lord said to me, Do not say I am only a youth, for to all to whom I send you, you shall go, and whatever I command you, you shall speak. So the Lord answers Jeremiah's objection there as well, that the Lord will provide him with the words to speak. And the same is the case here with Moses as well. So God's answer in verse 11 to Moses is that God is the creator. God is the one who imparts abilities to men. He asks, who has made man's mouth? Who makes him dumb or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? So God is the one who gives us our mouth and gives us the ability to speak or not speak, to hear or not hear. So God is the one who is in control. God will provide. So the implication is that Moses should rely upon God rather than upon his own ability or lack of ability as he saw it. So God instructs Moses then to go and assures him that he will be with his mouth and will teach him what he is to say. There in verse 12, he says, Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. So this is no excuse to say, well, I'm not a good speaker, because God says, I'm going to be with you. I'll be with your mouth. I will give you the words you need to speak. So God will provide Moses with everything that is necessary for him to do this. So to each of the objections or the excuses that Moses has raised here as to why he shouldn't go, God has provided an answer. So Moses is running out of excuses now, and so in verse 13 he simply says, "O my Lord, send, I pray, some other person. I don't want to do it, just send someone else." And now God's patience has run out a bit, and verse 14 tells us that God becomes angry with Moses. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. Moses was unwilling to do what God wanted him to do, and so God becomes angry. Moses is not going to be let off. He's not going to get out of this, but God is gracious, and God will send him his brother Aaron to help him. And Aaron is a good speaker. Aaron can speak well. And God tells Moses that Aaron is on his way to come and meet you. We'll meet Aaron later in the chapter as well when he arrives. So God is going to provide Aaron to assist Moses with this. So Moses how it will work is that Moses will speak to Aaron and put the words into his mouth, and then Aaron will deliver the speech. So in verse 15 here, God promises to be with Moses' mouth, so God will give him the words, and with Aaron's mouth when those words are delivered, and God will teach Moses what he needs to do. So Aaron will, in effect, be Moses' mouthpiece. He will be speaking Moses' words to the people. In verse 16, God says to Moses, "He shall be a mouth for you, and you shall be to him as God." So it's as if Moses is God and Aaron is the prophet, and the words are coming from Moses to Aaron, and then Aaron is speaking them. Later in chapter 7 and verse 1, we see how this all works out. This is when they're back in Egypt and they've gone to Pharaoh here. And the Lord said to Moses, "See, I make you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother shall tell Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go out of his land." So that's how it will work. God will give the words to Moses. Moses will give the words to Aaron, and Aaron will deliver the speech to Pharaoh. And then verse 17, God gives Moses the instruction that he is to take that shepherd's rod with him when he goes, which will enable him to do those signs that God is empowering him to do. So now Moses departs or gets ready to leave for Egypt. We'll read here verses 18 to 23. Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, "Let me go back, I pray, to my kinsmen in Egypt and see whether they are still alive." And Jethro said to Moses, "Go in peace." And the Lord said to Moses in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who were seeking your life are dead." So Moses took his wife and his sons and set them on an ass and went back to the land of Egypt. And in his hand Moses took the rod of God. And the Lord said to Moses, "When you go back to Egypt, see that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles that I have put in your power. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. And you shall say to Pharaoh, 'Thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son, and I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay your firstborn son.'" So after this meeting with God there at the burning bush, Moses then returns home to Jethro, his father-in-law, and he asks permission to return to Egypt to his kinsmen. And he says to see whether they are still alive. So I want to go back home, see if everyone's okay, if they're all still alive. Moses doesn't tell Jethro the real purpose of his return here. He just tells him, "We just want to go back and see how they all are." And Jethro gives his permission, gives his blessing to Moses, and says to him, "Go in peace." And God tells Moses then to go back to Egypt, for all the men who were seeking your life are dead. This is referring back to the incident with the Moses' murder of the Egyptian back in chapter 2 and verse 15. after Moses had to flee. And verse 15 said that when Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. So there was a price on Moses' head if he went back to Egypt. There were people who wanted him dead, but now God gives him the assurance that that Pharaoh and others maybe are dead who wanted to kill Moses. So it's safe. It's really an assurance that it is safe now for him to return. Something similar, of course, happened with Jesus at his birth in Matthew chapter 2, when Herod ordered the death of the children in Bethlehem. And Jesus and Mary and Joseph had fled down to Egypt. And then Matthew chapter 2, verse 19 says, yeah, the children, the male children in Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, they were to be put to death. So Mary and Joseph have fled down to Egypt. And then verse 19, Matthew chapter 2, verse 19 says, "But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead." And again, God is telling Joseph and Mary that it's safe to go back. That those who wanted to kill the baby, Jesus, are themselves now dead. So it's okay for you to go back. And this is what's happening here to Moses as well, that those who wanted him dead are now dead themselves. So Moses can go back. So Moses now leaves Midian, where he's spent the past 40 years, and he takes with him his wife and sons. Notice the plural there of sons. We've already been told of the birth of his first son, whose name was Gershom. That was in chapter 2, verse 22. But he also had a second son, who is named Eleazar, and that's we learn that from Exodus chapter 18 and verse 4. His name is given there. Well, the name of the two sons is explained there as well. That Moses' wife Zipporah has the two sons. One is named Gershom, for he said, I've been a sojourner in a foreign land. And the name of the other, Eleazar, for he said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. So the two sons there have names which reflect Moses' circumstances. I've been a sojourner in a foreign land, and God has helped me. God has delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. So the sons' names were a reminder of those events from the life of Moses. So Moses sets his family on an ass, and they start on their journey back to the land of Egypt. And Moses, we're told, takes with him this rod. It's described there as the rod of God, and that's what he will be using later when he gets into to meet with Pharaoh. So God now instructs Moses that when he gets to Egypt, he's to go to Pharaoh, and he is to do all of these miracles, the signs that God has empowered him to do before him. However, God also says, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. You can go there and do the miracles, but his heart will be hardened. The hardening of Pharaoh's heart is seen as a bit of a problem or a difficulty for us. Would God deliberately harden someone's heart so as to prevent them from making free choices? So God says here that I will harden his heart, Pharaoh's heart. And Exodus, the book of Exodus describes this condition of hardening in three ways. Sometimes it is said that God hardens Pharaoh's heart, as we have here in verse 21. When you go back to Egypt, see that that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles which I have put in your power, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then later in chapter 7, verse 3, God says again there, but I will harden Pharaoh's heart. And though I multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh will not listen to you. And then in chapter 9, verse 12, but the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not listen to them, as the Lord had spoken to Moses. Chapter 10 and verse 1, then the Lord said to Moses, go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants. So at times it is said that it is God who has hardened Pharaoh's heart. But at other times it is said that Pharaoh has hardened his own heart. So in chapter 8, verse 15, we're told here, this is after the plague of frogs, but when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he hardened his heart and would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Then in verse 32 of Exodus chapter 8 as well, Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also, so after the plague of flies, and did not let the people go. Chapter 9, verse 34, but when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunder had ceased, he sinned yet again and hardened his heart, he and his servants. So we see times where we're told that it was Pharaoh himself who hardened his heart. And then sometimes it is just said that his heart was hardened without indicating any cause, either God or himself. So chapter 7, verse 13, still Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Chapter 9, verse 7, but the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the people go. What we do know about Pharaoh is that he was a stubborn character. In chapter 13 and verse 15, we're told this concerning him. For when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord slew all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. So that stubborn character is mentioned there, that he was not willing to change his mind. His mind was made up about something and he was unwilling to change, and refusing to acknowledge the power of God through these miracles and these plagues that came upon Egypt. So God used this situation then in order to bring about his own purpose. Paul makes reference to the hardening of the heart in his letter to the Romans, in Romans chapter 9, verses 14 to 18. Romans chapter 9, verse 14. Paul writes this, what shall we say then? Is there injustice on God's part? By no means, for he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. So it depends not upon man's will or exertion, but upon God's mercy. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, I have raised you up for the very purpose of showing my power in you, so that my name may be proclaimed in all the earth. So then he has mercy upon whomever he wills, and he hardens the heart of whomever he wills. So Paul uses the hardening of the heart there as a way in which God shows his mercy and his power. So when the book of Exodus speaks of God hardening Pharaoh's heart and Pharaoh hardening his own heart, there's no contradiction, but rather the same condition is being described from two different points of view. So the means by which God hardens Pharaoh's heart is not through some deliberate intervention in order to produce that hardening, but rather through the events that come upon Egypt, which are under God's control, and through those events, the way in which Pharaoh responds reveals his character. So God knows the character of Pharaoh, and he knows how Pharaoh will respond when these situations arise, when he's confronted with these situations. So in one sense, God hardens God hardens Pharaoh's heart because he is producing the circumstances which will lead to the hardening of his heart. And in another sense, Pharaoh hardens his own heart because he is responsible for the way in which he responds to these events. So God never forces Pharaoh to act contrary to his own choice. Pharaoh always has the freedom of choice to do what he wants to do, but God knows how Pharaoh is going to react to these situations. And so God is in control in that sense, but Pharaoh is still making his own choices. So Moses is when he returns to Egypt, God instructs him here to present himself before Pharaoh with this message. Thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son, and I say to you, let my son go that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay your firstborn son. So it's about the firstborn son. Israel is described as being God's firstborn son. That description of Israel as God's firstborn son is found in Jeremiah as well, Jeremiah chapter 31. Jeremiah chapter 31. Verse 9, with weeping they shall come, and with consolations I will lead them back. Speaking of the return of the people from their exile, this is what it's talking about here. I will make them walk by brooks of water in a straight path in which they shall not stumble. For I am a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. Name Ephraim there it means Israel. For I am a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. And then in verse 20 of Jeremiah 31 as well, is Ephraim my dear child? Is he my darling child? For as often as I speak against him, I do remember him still. Therefore my heart yearns for him. I will surely have mercy on him, says the Lord. An expression of God's love and compassion for his firstborn, Israel or Ephraim. And then in the prophet Hosea as well, Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. He also speaks of Israel as his firstborn, or as his son. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. So the reference there, of course, to the Exodus as well. Out of Egypt I called my son. And again, the tender care that God has for his firstborn. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took him up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of compassion, with the bands of love, and I became to them as one who eases the yoke on their jaws. And I bent down to them and fed them. So God expressing his love and care for them there. The firstborn son occupied a position of preeminence and honor within the family. Firstborn were important. We see this in Genesis chapter 49 and verse 3 when Jacob is blessing his sons. Reuben was his firstborn. And in chapter 49, verse 3, he says to Reuben, Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my strength, preeminent in pride and preeminent in power. So that's how the firstborn was regarded. And to the Egyptians, the firstborn were important as well. The firstborn were regarded as gods, as being sacred. So here the situation that Moses is to present to Pharaoh is that, well, if Pharaoh refuses to let God's firstborn son go, Israel, then God says he will slay Pharaoh's firstborn son. So it'd be about what's going to happen to the firstborn. Well, verses 24 to 26 now record for us a rather strange incident which happens on the journey to Egypt. So verse 24 to 26 goes on to say this. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Then Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched Moses' feet with it and said, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." So he let him alone. Then it was that she said, "You are a bridegroom of blood," because of the circumcision. So this rather odd incident takes place at some point on the journey to Egypt, and it's connected with the necessity of circumcision. The text itself is difficult to sort of understand because it's not very clear. Um, who who was it that God was seeking to kill? Verse 24 says, at a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Well, who's the him? Not named there, but it probably is Moses. Some think it was Moses' son, Gershom, but it just says him there, but it would fit that it was Moses. So and how was God going to kill him? Why did God want to kill him? So it's a bit of an obscure text, really, but it's connected with circumcision, and circumcision was the sign of the covenant given by God to Abraham back in Genesis chapter 17, where God introduced the idea of circumcision as a sign of the covenant that he had made with Abraham. And verse 14 of Genesis 17 says, "Any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant." So being circumcised was an important sign that someone was included in that covenant. So circumcision was an act of obedience. It was a sign of dedication to God. So from this passage, it would seem that Moses had not circumcised his son. And so at a lodging place, that's a place where travelers could rest for the night, so on their way to Egypt, God sought to kill Moses. Well, we presume it's Moses. But the situation is dealt with by Zipporah, Moses' wife. She takes control of the situation. She takes a flint to cut off her son's foreskin. Later in the book of Joshua, in Joshua chapter 5, verses 2 and 3, we see here that flint is used again to circumcise those of Israel who hadn't been circumcised during the period when they were in the wilderness. Joshua chapter 5 verse 2 says that at that time the Lord said to Joshua, "Make flint knives and circumcise the people of Israel again the second time." So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the people of Israel at Gibeath Aloth. And this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the males of the people who came out of Egypt, all the men of war, had died on the way in the wilderness after they had come out of Egypt. Though all the people who came out had been circumcised, yet all the people that were born on the way in the wilderness after they had come out of Egypt had not been circumcised. So during their time in the wilderness, they had neglected this. Now, when they're about to go into the land, that is rectified, and they are circumcised. So here in this case, though, Zipporah takes a flint and cuts off her son's foreskin, and she touched Moses. Well, we presume it's Moses. In verse 25 says she took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched Moses' feet with it. The text says Moses, but actually the name Moses is not in the text. It just says touched his feet with it. So again, we have to read things in there. And presumably it was Moses. And she says, surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me. And we don't know what she meant by this. How did she say it? Is it an expression of her displeasure with Moses, that she's had to do this in order to save Moses, or is it an expression of her relief that I'm a bridegroom, you're a bridegroom of blood to me, that Moses is now been saved, and so she's expressing her relief over that. Again, we don't really know how she said it or what she meant by it. But the point is, it seems that Zipporah's action had averted Moses' death. Um, for after she had performed the circumcision, we're told here, so he let him alone. And again, we have to presume what that means is that God let Moses alone, allowed him to live. The incident is related, perhaps to emphasize the importance of obedience, that Moses had failed to obey God by not circumcising his son, and God took a serious view of that matter. So the last section in the chapter, verse 27 to 31, goes on to say this. The Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. So he went and met him at the mountain of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord with which he had sent him, and all the signs which he had charged him to do. Then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the people of Israel, and Aaron spoke all the words which the Lord had spoken to Moses, and did the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel, and that he had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshipped. So Aaron, Moses' brother, receives a word from God to go into the wilderness to meet Moses. How God spoke to him, how he received that word, we're not told. But he goes and they meet at the mountain of God. This is Mount Horeb, as it was described in chapter 3 and verse 1, where Moses had the experience with the burning bush. It's the same as Mount Sinai. They greet one another with a kiss. And we may wonder, was this their first meeting since Moses had fled from Egypt? Is this the first time they've met in 40 years, perhaps? And Moses now told Aaron everything that had happened, told him the words God had spoken to him and the signs which God had charged him to do. And then by the time we come to verse 29, the next verse there, they're now back in Egypt. So the rest of the journey is passed over, and Moses and Aaron are now have arrived in Egypt, and they called together the elders of the people of Israel. And Aaron, acting as Moses' spokesman, as God had directed, communicated to the elders the words of God that had been spoken to Moses, and Moses was able to do those signs in front of the people that God had empowered him to do. And we see the reaction of the people to this in verse 31, that they believed and they were convinced that God was aware of their affliction. And they responded by bowing their heads and worshipping. So this arrival of Moses and Aaron and the words that Moses shared with the elders there, and letting them know that God knows what's going on, God knows their affliction, and something is going to happen. So this must have really given them great hope that deliverance was going to take place. So next time we'll get into chapter 5 and we see how this plan of deliverance goes into action, and the obstacles that Moses is going to face in all of that. So a few questions perhaps to think about from our text this evening. What excuses might we make for not doing what God wants us to do? We've seen all the excuses Moses came up with. Well, what about us? What excuses do we come up with? And what can we do when we find it difficult to speak to others about our faith? Moses said he wasn't a good speaker. Some of us struggle in talking to people about our faith. What can we do to try to get over that? And then what factors or circumstances can affect a person's heart and their willingness to obey God?